Today, at least to start with, on Shekhinah, the divine feminine. This is really one of the great contributions of the Kabbalah. I had mentioned the first week that you might say there are three great contributions of Kabbalah. One, to say that God is Ein Sof, the infinite. The second, perhaps, is this balancing of the masculine depiction of God with the feminine, Shekhinah. And the third, that God needs us, that God is incomplete without our active participation. So we've talked a little bit about all of those, but I want to focus today on Shekhinah. In some ways, it's the greatest contribution of the Kabbalah. And um, uh, Ari, do you want to spotlight me so people could see my face?
Sure.
Great. I guess people, you can choose your view, but this will show up. Great. So, Shekhinah, where does this come from? The word is not invented by the Kabbalah. We had mentioned the term Ein Sof, which is a Kabbalistic invention. But Shekhinah appears very frequently, not in the Bible, but in the Talmud and the Midrash. But let's start, as I like to, with the root of the word, Shachan. Okay, Shekhinah comes from the root Shachan, which means to dwell. You could translate Shekhinah as the dwelling of God. Sometimes it's called God's indwelling presence. So where does that appear in the Torah? Most prominently in the term Mishkan. Okay, the M, that letter Mem, is just a prefix. Mishkan is from the root Shachan. Mishkan is the tabernacle, as it's sometimes called. You could really translate it the dwelling. This is the portable sanctuary, the portable synagogue that the children of Israel carry through the desert as they're wandering from Egypt to the Holy Land. And they're commanded to build a mishkan, to build a dwelling, a tabernacle. In fact, the verse says, V'asuli mikdash, have them make me a holy place, v'shachanti bitocham, I will dwell among them. So this is the dwelling place of God. And then when the temple is built, the Beit HaMikdash, there too, God is said to dwell. So it's in rabbinic literature that this root shachan turns into the noun Shekhinah. We're going to look at some texts in a few minutes about tracing the concept of Shekhinah, the term of Shekhinah, from its appearance in rabbinic literature to the new meaning that it has in the Kabbalah. But before we do that, I just want to say something about how radical it is to picture God as feminine. Okay, now, in the last 20 or 30 years, it's become more common. There's a strong movement, a feminist movement within Judaism, of course, all over the planet. We're all aware of the need to balance the patriarchal influence with the feminine. But for that to enter theology is very significant and very radical. There was a great feminist thinker some decades ago who said, as long as God is male, the male is God. Okay, M-A-L-E, obviously. As long as God is male, the male is God. What does that mean? If people picture God as father, if people picture God solely in masculine terms, in masculine forms, that has a very strong impact on society, on culture, on people's mentality, on people's behavior, on people's prejudices. If you think that there's a man running the universe, then men are seen as the ones who should run the world. So it's very important to balance the masculine with the feminine in so many ways, and perhaps especially in theology, at least also in theology. So, how can a Jewish thinker come out and say that God is feminine, that God is a woman? Almost every description of God in the Bible is masculine, right? Father, king, ruler, judge, warrior. To describe God as feminine is very radical, it's very new. But you may remember I mentioned there's a phrase in the Zohar, new ancient words. In the Aramaic, it's milin chadatin atikin, new ancient words. The Zohar claims to be simultaneously new and ancient. You could say that refers partly to the fact that the Zohar appeared in Spain in the 13th century, and yet it claimed to be much more ancient. The author of the Zohar never admitted that he wrote the book. He claimed he was copying out from an ancient manuscript and that the original went back to Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yochai. So right there you have something new and ancient. The Zohar is new in the sense that it came out right then and there in Spain, but the person who made it available claimed it was ancient. And he's playing on that combination, that paradox, that oxymoron, new ancient words. But that applies also to Shekhinah. To say that God is a woman, to say that God is both female and male, that's certainly radical, that's certainly new, but it's also, you might say, very ancient. After all, in the ancient world, in the ancient Near East, for example, the goddess was alive and well. We know that the Canaanites worshipped a goddess along with a god. The most famous male-female pair is Baal and Asherah. Baal was the storm god, the god of the rain. Asherah was the goddess of fertility. And the marriage of Baal and Asherah was celebrated in the cult through various rituals. We know, in fact, that there were Israelites who were attracted to the worship of the Canaanite gods and goddesses, right? The Bible castigates Israel for going after the false gods of Canaan, for worshiping Baal, for worshiping Asherah. Okay, in fact, you have that name Asherah, you have the word Asherah appearing in the Bible, even in the Torah itself. And obviously, the Bible is opposed to Asherah, right? The Torah says you should smash any image of Asherah, cut down any image of Asherah. Sometimes those images were simply a tree. A tree might be planted as a sacred tree, commemorating Asherah, involved in the worship of Asherah. So the Torah tries to eradicate Asherah. Why? Because there were Israelites who were attracted to Asherah. But not only that, it's more interesting than that. It's not just that there were Israelites who wanted to worship this Canaanite goddess. Some of them wanted to combine the worship of Asherah with the worship of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, with the worship of the God of Israel. How do we know that? The Bible doesn't come out and say that explicitly, but we know it because archaeologists have found records. They've found inscriptions. For example, they found an inscription that asks for a blessing from Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and his Asherah. Look how that's worded. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and his Asherah, his goddess, his partner, his mate. So there were Israelites who wanted not to reject Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, but to have a feminine counterpart to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, to the God of Israel. Obviously, the Bible is out to combat this idolatrous worship. But really, you might say what happens in Kabbalah is that this feminine counterpart of the God of Israel reemerges. It's the reemergence of the feminine. So in that sense, it's both new and ancient. It's a new radical formulation, but as the word radical often implies, there's some root there, right? Radical comes from the root meaning root. There's an ancient root to the goddess, and this goddess has now reemerged. The great scholar of Kabbalah, Gershom Scholem, Scholem. I'd encourage you to look at any of his books. Some of them are challenging and difficult, but he was the person who really created Kabbalah as an academic field of study. Scholem calls this phenomenon of the goddess reemerging, he calls this the revenge of myth. The revenge of myth. In other words, this myth of the goddess had been almost entirely eliminated, but somehow she comes back, she reemerges right in the heart of Rabbinic Judaism in the Kabbalah. In a more popular way, you could say the goddess has become kosher. That's what Shekhinah represents, the goddess becoming kosher. So let's look at some texts. I want to go through the first page and then I welcome people's questions. Ari will pick out a few of the best ones for us. So let's look at this sheet here. And Ari's making this available to everyone as a PDF. You can printed out later. Shekhinah, the feminine half of God. Okay, this is how you would spell Shekhinah. It's spelled various ways. One nice thing is that you can tell it's feminine because the first three letters are she, S-H-E. Okay, sometimes things work even better in English than in Hebrew. I don't mean to erase that, but that's S-H-E. Let's look first. We're not going to jump right into Kabbalah. I want to begin with some teachings from rabbinic literature, and we'll see what Shekhinah means before we get to the Zohar, before we get to the Kabbalah. So this is a passage from the Midrash, from rabbinic interpretations. A Gentile asked Rabban Gamliel, "Why did the Blessed Holy One reveal himself to Moses in a bush?" Okay, he's thinking, of course, of the burning bush, right? Couldn't God have picked something more impressive, a eucalyptus tree, a cedar tree? Rabban Gamliel replied, "If God had revealed himself on top of a carob tree or on top of a fig tree, what would you have said? You would have asked the same question. However, there is no place on earth empty of Shekhinah." This really shows you what Shekhinah means in rabbinic literature. Okay, I want to try to be very clear here. I've been emphasizing that Shekhinah is the feminine half of God, okay, as I say right above here, the feminine half of God, but that really becomes explicit only in the Kabbalah. It's very hard to find the feminine nature of Shekhinah in rabbinic literature. So what is Shekhinah? Who is Shekhinah? Before we get to the Kabbalah, she's really exactly this. There's no place on earth empty of Shekhinah. In other words, Shekhinah is a name we give to God when we're emphasizing God's presence on earth, what's often called immanence, right? I-M-M-A-N-E-N-C-E, immanence, God's indwelling. Again, we could come back to the literal meaning of Shekhinah, God's dwelling in the world. The way to describe God's dwelling in the world is with this word, with this name, Shekhinah. So in rabbinic literature, it doesn't mean the feminine half of God, at least not explicitly. It means God's presence on earth. The other element we'll come to in a moment. First, let's look at number two. Here we have that great figure, Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai. Okay, a great teacher of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Later, the Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon, but you remember Rabbi Shimon lived in the 2nd century in the land of Israel. The Zohar was composed 1,100 years later in Spain in the 13th century. So the Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon, even though it was written in Spain over a millennium later. But this is the real historical Rabbi Shimon. This teaching, at least, is attributed to him. And what did he say? Rabbi Shimon said, happy are the righteous, for they cause Shekhinah to dwell on earth. Happy are the righteous, for they cause Shekhinah to dwell on earth. It's a beautiful saying, but there's something a little strange here. We just said that Shekhinah fills the earth, right? There's no place on earth empty of Shekhinah. So Shekhinah is already on earth. Why do you need someone to cause Shekhinah to dwell on earth? She's already here. So what are the righteous doing? What's the purpose of being righteous? I think what Rabbi Shimon means is that God is potentially in the world. God is potentially available. God is potentially in our lives. But to make that real takes some virtue. It takes some righteousness. You might say, what does it mean to be virtuous? What does it mean to be righteous? To bring out the reality of God, to make God real by acting lovingly, by helping to heal children, by helping to improve society. If we act in the world in virtuous ways, then we actualize this divine potential. Now let's look at number three. Here we come to Rabbi Akiva. I'm sure almost all of you know that name. He was actually the teacher of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai, was one of the disciples of Rabbi Akiva. And Akiva says, wherever Israel went in exile, Shekhinah was with them. Let's look at the Hebrew here. It's so short. I know a lot of you know Hebrew. Rabbi Akiva says, Shekol makom shegalu Shekhinah imahem. Wherever Israel went in exile, Shekhinah was with them. So this shows you the other main feature of Shekhinah. She's the immanence of God in the world, and she's the intimacy of God with Israel. God's closeness with Israel, God's relationship with Israel is reflected in this name Shekhinah. In other words, you might say there's a transcendent aspect of God that could be expressed as the Holy One, blessed be He. That's a more royal designation of God, but there's a more intimate, loving relationship, an aspect of God, and that's reflected in the name Shekhinah. Okay, maybe there's something feminine here. There's something motherly about Shekhinah. After all, every word in Hebrew every noun in Hebrew is either masculine or feminine, and Shekhinah is feminine, right? It ends with the letter Hey. Most nouns that end with the letter Hey are feminine. So Shekhinah is she, Shekhinah is feminine, and Shekhinah in some passages already in rabbinic literature is described in feminine terms. So Shekhinah is the loving presence of God accompanying Israel. Let's look at the next one, number 4. Rav Yosef, when he heard his mother's footsteps, he would say, I will arise before Shekhinah, who was approaching. In other words, whenever his mother came into the room, he would get up. He'd say, I'm getting up because Shekhinah is coming into the room. So this is remarkable. For at least this one rabbi in the Talmud, his mother was an embodiment of Shekhinah. This, I think, comes closer than almost any other passage in rabbinic literature to indicating the feminine nature of Shekhinah, the motherly nature of Shekhinah. Okay, he at least identified Shekhinah and his mother. Just one rabbi, but if he did it, there were certainly others who also almost certainly had that same perspective. That's so important because in Kabbalah, Shekhinah is overtly feminine, overtly the mother, really the partner of the masculine divinity. One quote here from the Bible. We've been looking at everything so far in rabbinic literature. This is from the prophet Jeremiah. Thus says Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay, that's how I pronounce that 4-letter name of God. Thus says Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, a voice is heard in Ramah, or it might mean a voice is heard on a height, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted for her children, because they are no more. Okay, this is the prophet Jeremiah who is really mourning the exile of the Jews. That this is at the destruction of the first temple. The people of Israel of Judah are being exiled to Babylon, and Jeremiah imagines or experiences God saying that Rachel is weeping for her children. Now, who is Rachel? Rachel, of course, is one of the matriarchs, right? Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So Rachel was Jacob's wife. And here Rachel is, of course, Rachel died many centuries before Jeremiah's time, but Jeremiah imagines that Rachel is still around, that she is weeping for her children. Okay, he's picturing Rachel as the mother of Israel. Now, why am I including this here? Because this is really one aspect of Shekhinah. Shekhinah becomes, in Kabbalah, the mother of Israel. And remember that Rabbi Akiva already said, whenever Israel goes into exile, Shekhinah was with them. So Shekhinah is with the people, comforting the people. And here Rachel is weeping for her children who are going into exile. So there's some connection here between Shekhinah, how Rabbi Akiva pictures Shekhinah, and long before that, how the prophet Jeremiah pictures Rachel. Okay, obviously Jeremiah doesn't use the word Shekhinah, but by using Rachel in that sense, there's a parallel with Rabbi Akiva's view of Shekhinah. Okay, and let's look at another passage this is from the Talmud. I'm going to pause after this quote to see if there are already a few questions. Rabbi Chanina, son of Papa, said, whoever enjoys this world without reciting a blessing, it is as if he robs the Blessed Holy One and assembly of Israel. As is said, he who robs his father and mother and says it is no crime is partner to a destroyer. His father is none other than the Blessed Holy One, and his mother is none other than assembly of Israel. Okay, this is just a few lines, but it's rather complex. Let's go through it carefully. This Rabbi Shekhinah says, if you enjoy this world without reciting a blessing, okay, if you eat a meal, if you eat a piece of bread, if you eat an apple, if you eat anything and you don't say a bracha, right? The rabbis created all these brachot to say before you eat various things, before you enjoy various material objects in the world. So if you don't recite a bracha, it's as if you're robbing God. You're robbing God of this rather than acknowledging God as the source of the fruit that you're eating. But he doesn't say only it's as if you rob God. What does he say? It's as if you rob the Blessed Holy One. That's the most common rabbinic name for God. Okay, in Hebrew, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. That's the masculine quality of God. Now, who is this assembly of Israel? Assembly of Israel, the Hebrew is Knesset Yisrael. Knesset Yisrael, the assembly of Israel, usually means simply the people of Israel. Okay, many of you know the word Knesset because of the Israeli Knesset. Knesset is a gathering in modern Israel, the parliament. So Knesset Yisrael, the assembly of Israel, the gathering of Israel, usually in rabbinic literature, that means the people of Israel. But here it can't really mean the people because a person, an Israelite, is doing this. If an Israelite eats a piece of fruit and doesn't say a bracha, it's as if he's robbing the Blessed Holy One and assembly of Israel. And notice the verse from Proverbs that he quotes, right? Because usually in rabbinic literature, if you say something, you have to prove it with a verse, right? What's called a proof text. You have to prove it by quoting a verse from the Bible. What does he quote? He who robs his father and his mother and says it is no crime is partner to a destroyer. What does that verse mean in the Bible? In a moment, we'll see what Rabbi Shekhinah means, but let's start in Proverbs itself. What does it mean? It means literally, if you rob your father and mother, if you steal money from your parents and you say, nothing wrong with that, then you're doing something very destructive. It's as if you're partner to a destroyer. That it's destructive to rob your parents. That's what the verse means. But for Rabbi Shekhinah, who is his father and mother? He says, his father is the Blessed Holy One. His mother is Assembly of Israel. So who is Assembly of Israel here? Assembly of Israel is the partner of the divine masculine. She is really the mother of Israel. There's some entity, there's some quality beyond our normal everyday existence known as Knesset Yisrael. It's the mother of Israel. Now notice Rabbi Shekhinah does not say Shekhinah. Okay, in the Kabbalah, Shekhinah becomes the mother. Shekhinah is the mother of Israel. Here, rather than calling the mother Shekhinah, Rabbi Shekhinah calls her the assembly of Israel. This is something beyond the people. It's really, you could say, the entire people of Israel raised up to a divine level. Okay, before we go on, I want to stop and see if anything needs to be clarified. Let's not for the moment focus on Kabbalah, just on what we've seen so far, what Shekhinah means in the Bible and the Talmud.
So yeah,
all
a
right.
few questions. People are, it's a good group and there's lots of questions and we can't get to all of them and many of them are deep. One question is, well, one statement was, yeah, there's archaeological evidence that's shown many little statues that were found in houses in ancient Israel, and they were Shekhinah, a female goddess.
Right.
The question is, from a Kabbalistic perspective and what you just read, it seems to be different. That's not the revenge of the goddess. People don't come back and worship a goddess, but that the goddess becomes an aspect of God. So it's not like God has a consort like God in Asherah, but that the term that we're using here for Shekhinah is actually just an element of God. So isn't that a different approach to goddess worship?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question. Uh, the word goddess has very negative associations with many people, largely because of the Bible, right? Either you're worshiping the true God or you're going after this false goddess. But in Kabbalah, God is, equally male and female. Certainly, Kabbalah insists that God is one. And yet the Zohar seems to describe a romance between a masculine divine figure and a feminine divine figure. So, whether you call Shekhinah the goddess or not, it depends partly whether you like the word goddess, right? If you think the word goddess is so despicable because of Canaanite idolatry and orgiastic practices, or however we've come to think of it in negative terms, you might want to avoid the word goddess. This really takes us back to the word Asherah, and there's a remarkable teaching in the Zohar. I think it's maybe one of the most radical teachings in the entire Zohar. The Zohar actually says that originally Shekhinah was called Asherah, that the name Asherah really applied to Shekhinah. But why don't we call Shekhinah Asherah now? Well, that's because people got into Canaanite goddess worship. So at that point, the name Asherah was removed from Shekhinah, and it was left only to apply to the Canaanite goddess. But it's remarkable that the Zohar, by saying that, Shekhinah was originally called Asherah, the Zohar is really saying there's something holy about the image of a goddess. And Kabbalah really tries to, I would say, to sanctify the idea of the goddess and to redeem that. But we'll come to the Zohar's description soon. It's a good question, and it's not easy to explain that.
Two other questions. One was people are fascinated and want to know about the Christian approach to Shekhinah, where we see that. And is it Mary? Is it the Holy Spirit? Is it
Mhm.
are they also kind of um, searching? Is this goddess coming up in Christianity as well?
Yeah, there's this yearning for the feminine, right? I think people were aware for centuries and centuries that it was very limiting to put God in this masculine box. So people yearned for the feminine, and in Christianity, that sometimes comes out with a veneration of Mary. Now, this is interesting because Mary is not divine. Now, I say that on the popular level, people really did worship Mary. But officially, technically, right, theologically, Mary is not divine, right? She's the mother of Jesus, and you're allowed to venerate Mary, but venerate is not the same as worship. To worship Mary is not kosher. Okay, but still, just the veneration of Mary shows you some value that's being placed on the feminine. And I think, as we mentioned briefly previously, there's no doubt that the veneration of Mary had an impact on the Kabbalists. I don't think it's an accident that Shekhinah becomes so prominent in Spain in the 13th century, and that is the height of the cult of Mary. So in the Catholic world, Mary is being venerated. And at the same time, in the Jewish world, Shekhinah is emerging as a major figure. So there is some influence there. Both of us have mentioned a very fine article by Arthur Green on the Virgin Mary and Shekhinah. I can send a link for that so that you could send that out to people. There's a way to get that PDF easily. Wonderful article. The influence that the veneration of Mary had on the emergence of Shekhinah.
I think I included that in our first
Ah,
follow-up, but I'll try to include it again. People have pointed out the interesting connection between Rabbi Akiva and remember we talked about the mystical journey of Rabbi Akiva,
hmm.
well, I guess one question is, was that really a story I mean, was that attributed to Rabbi Akiva, or is that something that we know that is real, or was a later story attributed to him? But either way, but Rabbi Akiva, and then being the teacher of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and then Rabbi Akiva being the champion of including Shir HaShirim in the canon, and Shir as and this whole mystical relations of man and woman. So there's this interesting connection that people have brought together with the Shir HaShirim reference and Rabbi Akiva. So
Yes, the Song of Songs, Shir Shirim, is certainly relevant here. In fact, Arthur Green's article connects that. It's the Virgin Mary and Shekhinah and the Song of Songs. So, what is the Song of Songs? It's the most erotic book in the Bible. If we're talking about male and female, We really have to include some reference to the Song of Songs. Now, that's a human couple, right? The human couple, the shepherd and the shepherdess meeting each other in the fields. You know, their romance, their love, which is described so poetically and so erotically in that book. That book was a little bit too erotic for some of the editors of the Bible. And as you indicated, almost didn't make it into the Bible. There were people who wanted to exclude the Song of Songs from the biblical canon. Rabbi Akiva saved it by saying this is really describing the love between whom? Between the Blessed Holy One and Knesset Yisrael, the assembly of Israel, meaning the people. Rabbi Akiva, the early Knesset Yisrael, the assembly of Israel, meant the people of Israel. So there's a romance between God and Israel. And that's what Shir Shirim was describing, according to the Midrash, according to Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva's own mystical experiences, you know, reflected in that story of the four who entered Pardes, the four who entered the orchard. And then his disciples, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon, to Rabbi Shimon, the Zohar is attributed. So there's a very interesting development there.
Last question. You gave us a quote, as long as God is male, the male is God. And so you said, well, we have this introduction of Shekhinah into Kabbalistic tradition, the revenge of the goddess, bringing femininity back into tradition. And yet, the espousers of Kabbalah, I don't think you would say are feminists. And so do you think that bringing Shekhinah into the tradition really made a difference in that regard?
Yeah, that's certainly important to say. I think there was a great theological breakthrough, right, to balance the male with the female. But in terms of the impact it had on society, that's taken, you know, 700 years since the Zohar. We're still not there totally. You know, maybe we'll have a female president in a few months. But certainly the battle for equal rights is still going on, and you don't see great progress in the world of the Jewish mystics, right? Women are not given equal rights. Women were often excluded from Torah study in general. It's not that women weren't allowed to study Kabbalah. Specifically, women weren't allowed to study Torah, or they weren't encouraged to study Torah and Talmud to become literate. Rachel Elior, who I know you value very greatly, she's done some very important work on that, and she has some of her work has been recently translated into English. I forget the title of the book exactly, but on how that dark history of excluding the feminine on the social level, in addition to the theological level. So I would say it was a theological breakthrough, and we're still working to translate that into social reality.
Okay,
Great.
so I think
Okay.
we're ready to go.
Let's return now, and I want to move us through rabbinic literature and to the Kabbalah. Let's look at number 7 here. Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Chanina, said, what is meant by the verse, after Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God shall you walk? Okay, it's anything italicized here is a quote from the Bible. So the book of Deuteronomy says, you know, walk after God. The Hebrew is Acharei Adonai Elohechem telchu, telechu, walk after God. In other words, follow God. Now, is it possible for a human to walk after Shekhinah? First of all, what's interesting here is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is the same as Shekhinah. Okay, but when we get to the Zohar, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will be married to Shekhinah. But here they're really synonymous. The Torah says walk after God. Rabbi Chama says, can you really do that? Can you walk after Shekhinah? Has it not already been said, for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God is a consuming fire? Right? Ki Adonai Elohecha esh ochlahu. God is a consuming fire. How can you walk right after fire? You'll be burnt up. However, this means to walk after the attributes of the Blessed Holy One. Okay, to imitate God. As God clothes the naked, so shall you clothe the naked. The Blessed Holy One visited the sick, so shall you visit the sick. The Blessed Holy One comforted mourners, so shall you comfort mourners. The Blessed Holy One buried the dead, so shall you bury the dead. Okay, each of these is proved by a verse. I've left out the verse. God clothes the naked by making clothes for Adam and Eve. God visits the sick when he appears to Abraham, right after Abraham was circumcised. God comforts mourners. I believe here it's, forget the verse section that's quoted there for comforting mourners. And burying the dead when God, according to the Midrash, buried Moses. Okay, the Torah just says, and he was buried, or he buried him, but the Midrash says God personally buried Moses. So God does these various ethical acts, and we should act ethically. Okay, what's the point here? Don't try to have direct contact with God. That would burn you up. That would be self-destructive. Rather, imitate God by acting in virtuous ways. And let's see, the parallel to this is number 8. Rabbi Elazar said, to love Yud-Heh-Vav, your God, and to cleave to him. Here we have this beautiful verb, davak, to cleave, uledav kavo, to cleave to God. This then becomes the idea of divekut, okay, of cleaving to God. So this is the origin of the mystical union with God. But here too, Rabbi Elazar says, can you really cleave to God? Is it possible for a human being to cleave to Shekhinah? Right? That would be destructive, self-destructive. However, whoever marries his daughter to a scholar or engages in business to benefit scholars or benefit scholars from his possessions, that person is considered by scripture as if he cleaves to Shekhinah. Ki'ilu midabek b'Shekhinah, as if he cleaves to Shekhinah. This is a beautiful example of the rabbis being somewhat uncomfortable with direct mystical experience. They say you can't connect directly with God, you'd burn up, but be ethical. Here it's to support the study of Torah, right? Contribute to Orange County Community Scholars Program, right? Contribute to the spread of Torah, and then it says if you are uniting with Shekhinah. So now we're ready for the transition from rabbinic literature to Kabbalah. Here's what a Kabbalist says. This is a man named Yosef Jikatila. He was a Kabbalist in the 13th century in Spain, a colleague of Moses de Leon, who was the main author of the Zohar. And notice what he says now about the possibility of cleaving to Shekhinah. Surely all of Israel cleaves as one to God. May he be blessed. As is said, you cleaving to Yod-Heh-Vav, your God, are alive, every one of you, today. Okay, a famous verse in the Torah. You may recognize it because it's part of the Shabbat morning davening when the Torah is taken out of the ark. V'atem hadevekim b'Adonai Elohechem. You who cleave to Yod-Heh-Vav, your God, are alive, every one of you, today. So the Torah seems to be saying that Israel does cleave to God. Not only is it a command you should cleave, Israel is described as cleaving to God. A verse cannot depart from its pshat. A verse cannot depart from its simple sense. What does that mean? You might create midrash, you might reinterpret a verse, but don't abandon the literal meaning. Okay, the verse says you cleave to God, so Jikatila wants to hold on to that. He doesn't want to reinterpret it just ethically. He wants to keep alive the possibility of uniting with God. And now he just quotes some other verses from Deuteronomy. It's only in the book of Deuteronomy that we have this command to cleave to God, and it comes a number of times. Yod-Heh-Vav, your God, you shall revere. Him shall you serve, and to him you shall cleave. And another verse, him shall you serve, and to him shall you cleave. Shall you cleave? Undoubtedly. As to what our rabbis have said, may their memory be a blessing, is it possible for a human being to cleave to Shekhinah? It certainly is. This is beautiful. He takes the rhetorical question, is it possible to cleave to Shekhinah? Okay, when the rabbis use that in the passages we just looked at, the obvious answer is no. Is it possible to cleave to Shekhinah? No, you would burn up. But what does Jikatila say? He quotes the verse, he quotes the saying, V'chi efshar la'adam lihidavek b'Shekhinah. And what does he say? Efshar v'efshar. It certainly is possible. It's possible and it is possible, meaning it certainly is possible. So this is beautiful. This is a Kabbalist responding to the rabbinic view and saying they haven't gone far enough and they haven't been loyal to the simple meaning of the Torah. The Torah says cleave to God, and you can cleave to God. You can have this connection with Shekhinah. Let's look now at two short passages from the Zohar. Number 10. Rabbi Yossi said, There has never been a father as compassionate to his children as the Blessed Holy One. This is indicated by a verse. Not a single word has failed of all his good words. This is spoken by King Solomon when he dedicates the temple in the book of Kings. Not a single word has failed of all his good words. Come and see his compassion. Look at how compassionate God is. If it said not a single word has failed of all his words and nothing more, it would be better for the world to have never been created. What does that mean? He's saying if the verse said that God has never failed to carry out anything he spoke, that would be very troublesome. Because if God threatened to destroy or threatened to punish, he'd have to punish. But what does Solomon say? He says, not a single word has failed of all his good words. So God has to carry out his good words, but a threatening word, God may perhaps not carry out. But since it says of all his good words, it leaves the bad behind, for he does not want to enact a bad word. And even though he threatens and raises the lash, Mother comes and grasps his right arm. So the lash remains suspended, does not descend, and is not implemented, because both of them share one plan, he by threatening, and she by holding back his right arm. Okay, this is typical of the Zohar. In a way, it's typical. What I mean by that is he doesn't name Shekhinah, but he's obviously talking about Shekhinah. Shekhinah here is mother, and Shekhinah is she. So what's going on here? The masculine part of God might threaten Israel, raising the lash. Shekhinah comes and prevents the Holy One, blessed be he, from punishing Israel. Okay, this is a little bit of divine family dynamics. Okay, the father is threatening, the mother is protecting the child. Here, the mother is Shekhinah. So Shekhinah is the compassionate, motherly half of God who protects her children, the people of Israel. It's a beautiful example of how the Zohar fills out the picture of Shekhinah and makes it very clear that she is the feminine, she is the partner. I'm going to skip this next passage, and I want to go here to a beautiful passage in the Zohar. Some of you may have studied this with me before. This is the Zohar's commentary on the story of the Garden of Eden, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Okay, the verse in Genesis that he's interpreting is this. In Hebrew, it's just 3 words, Vayigaresh et ha'adam. He drove out Adam, or he drove out the human. He drove out the masculine figure in the garden. Okay, he drove out et ha'adam. Okay, they're just 3 words. Vayigaresh means he drove out. Et is a very funny word we'll come to in a moment. Ha'adam, the human. Okay, I'm translating it Adam, but literally it's the human. What's going on with this word et? What's this little word et? Et is a very strange word in Hebrew. Notice how it's spelled Aleph Taf, the first letter of the alphabet and the last letter of the alphabet. What does it mean? It means nothing. It's very strange. How can you have a word that means nothing? This word cannot really be translated. It's just a marker for the direct object. Okay, in Hebrew, you can't say he drove out the human. You have to say he drove out et the human. So this little word et is just indicating the object that's going to follow. It's a link between the action, driving out, and the object, ha'adam. But that's really not enough for the rabbinic mind or the Kabbalistic mind. Rabbi Akiva, coming back to that colorful figure, Rabbi Akiva used to interpret the word et. Whereas even though et doesn't have a clear translatable meaning, Rabbi Akiva said if the word et comes in the Torah, you can apply some meaning to it. It allows you to fill in the picture with some new subject matter. And that's what the Zohar does too. But for the Zohar, the word et indicates specifically Shekhinah. Why? Because she is A to Z. She is Aleph to Taf. She includes all of divine speech, all of divine power, all of divine revelation. That's one of her roles. She conveys the divine word to the world. So she is Aleph to Taf. She is it. And we'll see how that fits in here. Rabbi Elazar said, we do not know who divorced whom, if the Blessed Holy One divorced Adam or not. Let's just pause there. First of all, why divorce? The Hebrew doesn't say divorce, the Hebrew says to drive out, but this root garash in Hebrew can mean to divorce. Okay, divorce is a kind of driving out, and gerush, gerushin in Hebrew means divorce. So already there were rabbinic interpretations, there were midrashim that interpreted the Garden of Eden story as if God and Adam were married, and because Adam sinned, God divorced Adam. Okay, we already have a midrash that interprets this verse, Vayigaresh et Adam, he drove out Adam, to mean he divorced Adam. God divorced Adam. But Rabbi Elazar says, we don't know who divorced whom. Did God divorce Adam or not? Now, what's the alternative? Did God divorce Adam, or did Adam divorce God? How could you even think that? Okay, the Zohar doesn't want to say that. The Zohar wants us to think it. So the Zohar doesn't say, did the Blessed Holy One divorce Adam, or did Adam divorce the Blessed Holy One? The Zohar says, did the Blessed Holy One divorce Adam or not? Leaving it up to us, the reader, to come up with that radical, almost unthinkable alternative. Adam divorced God. Okay, the Zohar doesn't say it yet, but he's obviously beginning to imply it. But the word is transposed, which really means the verse is turned on its head. He drove out et. Look what he's doing. He's not reading, he drove out et ha'adam. He's stopping the sentence with et. It's as if it's et, period. He drove out et. Now, you remember I just said that et means Shekhinah. Okay, the Zohar doesn't say that clearly here, but the Zohar has that in mind. The Zohar is very cryptic. Okay, the Zohar isn't going to say that overtly because it's too shocking. The Zohar says he drove out et precisely. Who drove out et? Then we read the next word, ha'adam, Adam. Okay, you see what he's doing? He's dividing the sentence into two. He drove out et. Who drove out et? Ha'adam. You know, the verse obviously doesn't say that. The verse says he drove out et ha'adam. You can't put a period after the word et. That's unthinkable in Hebrew grammar. Et always introduces the next word. But the Zohar doesn't care about that here. Rabbi Elazar says, no, he drove out et. He divorced Shekhinah. Who divorced Shekhinah? The next word tells us, ha'adam, Adam. Adam actually drove out et. In other words, Adam divorced Shekhinah. Consequently, it's written, Yud-Heh-Vav Elohim, here we have a double name of God. Yud-Heh-Vav Elohim expelled him from the Garden of Eden. Okay, the Zohar doesn't deny that God expelled Adam, but the Zohar is saying, why did God expel Adam? Because Adam divorced Shekhinah. Adam drove out et, as we have said. Okay, I love that, as we have said. When did he say it? Just a couple lines before. He invented it, and then he says, as we have said, as if it's some ancient tradition. This is what I would call instant tradition. Okay, again, it's kind of new and ancient. It's brand new. It's a radical new teaching that Adam threw Shekhinah out of the garden, but he relates to it as if it's a tradition, as we have said. Okay, this sounds interesting. It sounds radical. It sounds surprising, but what does this mean? What does this mean that we drove Shekhinah out of the garden? Adam drove Shekhinah out of the garden. I think it's saying that in a sense, we're still in the garden, but we find ourselves in a state of alienation. We find ourselves in a mental state of exile because we've divorced ourselves from the divine. We've lost touch with the spiritual aspect of life. And so we find ourselves in a state of exile. So the challenge is to reacquaint ourselves with Shekhinah, to reacquaint ourselves with that divine potential. Okay, let me stop here and see if there are any further questions about what we've covered. I want to save a few minutes to show you another document, but let's
So again, many questions. The first one is the word cleave, because unfortunately it has two connotations that are exactly opposite. One is
Right.
to completely separate, and one is to cleave to something. And
Right.
people had asked, in the Hebrew, does it mean only one, or does it also have two connotations? That
Yeah.
lidbok,
Yeah.
I think, is the.
Right. Right. In Hebrew, it's just one. Davak is to cleave. We could say cling. Right. Cling has some negative associations too. You don't want to be too clingy. But right, cleave is interesting. It's interesting that some words mean what we think they mean and what they normally mean and the opposite. Freud has a beautiful essay on this, how some of the oldest words in the language could mean two opposite things. And that tells us something about the limits of speech, the limits of language. But the Hebrew is singular, has a singular meaning to attach, to be connected, to be joined with God.
And then, so some people brought up the story of the creation of humans in Bereshit,
Yes,
and the
yes,
creation story that people were created in the image of God, man and woman in the image of God. Therefore, the feminine of God is in the story of Bereshit, and the word of dvekut is also used in the story about women having to um, attach themselves to men. So that
yes,
was interesting.
yes. No, that's remarkable. Yeah, first that davak, the first time the root ever comes in the Torah, v'davak ish beishto, a man shall cleave to his wife. So davak begins with sexual union, with romantic union, and then in Deuteronomy, right? That's in Genesis. Then in Deuteronomy, it's applied to the relationship with God. So there's something erotic. There's something erotic about the root, about the word davak, even when it's used about the divine human relationship. The male-female thing is very important. Yes, what right? The creation of Adam and Eve, the creation of man and woman. What does the verse say, right? Naaseh Adam vayivra Elohim et Adam b'tsalmo. Right? God created the human in his image. B'tselem Elohim bara'oto. In the image of God, he created him. Zachar unekeva bara'otam. Male and female, he created them. Now, what's remarkable there is that male and female seems to be describing not only the human being, but the image of God. The image of God is male and female. So you could say it's not a radical thing for the Kabbalah to say that God is male and female. Right there in Genesis, we have the implication that God is male and female. So it's something that's implied in Genesis, but it takes the mystics to state that explicitly and to build a whole theology. You could say biblical theology is not really loyal to that hint that we have in the first chapter of Genesis that God's image is male and female. It takes the Kabbalah to turn that into an elaborate theology.
Thank you. Other people pointed out it seems like the term Shekhinah, which you showed appearing in rabbinic literature, just appears. There's no discussion about Shekhinah, correct? There's no discussion about in the Talmud about Shekhinah. It just somehow
I mean,
appears in the text.
the thing is, we don't really have a worked out theology in rabbinic literature, right? They weren't systematic theologians. So all of rabbinic theology really comes in these, brief descriptions. Some people say that midrash really is where you find theology, right? You have halakha, Jewish law, and then you have agadah or midrash, legends or midrash. It's in the midrash that you find theology, but even there, it's not in a systematic form. It's in these brief descriptions. So what you have to say is, when the word Shekhinah appears, you have to look closely at what's being said, what's being described. There you have a picture of Shekhinah. It's not, a full-blown description, but you get a good sense of what that word implies. So what I was showing was immanence and intimacy with Israel. That comes across very clearly, but it's not stated in that abstract way. It's stated in these images, in these very brief descriptions.
Another question is et used elsewhere in the Zohar Kabbalistic text to mean Shekhinah, or is it in this text that you've shown us
Yeah,
right now?
the Zohar uses it pretty frequently. Right, so Rabbi, so the development here is really three stages, and I think these three stages are the best way to move into mysticism. What I mean by that is what it means, what a word means in the Bible, what it means in rabbinic literature, let's say in Midrash, and what it means in Kabbalah or the Zohar. So in the Bible, this word et is simply what grammarians call a particle. Okay, its sole object is to introduce the direct object. Then Rabbi Akiva expands that. He says, well, this word et comes so frequently, we're not just going to let it slip by. You're allowed to add meaning to a verse because of the word et. And the Zohar says, okay, if we're going to add meaning, we want to add the most important meaning. So Et becomes a code name for Shekhinah. It's pretty frequent in the Zohar. It's not frequent in other texts, except when other texts are quoting the Zohar. The Zohar may the Zohar turns that into a general principle that Et refers to Shekhinah
Howard asks, yeah, sorry,
because of Aleph to Taf. Yeah.
that is fascinating. Howard asks about Shekhinah, whether Shekhinah is the aspect of God that interacts with humans. I mean, we see it based in the text that you showed us. Is that in the Kabbalistic tradition? Is that the aspect of God that most interacts with the world,
Yeah, you could say
humanity?
that. That I think is already reflected in the rabbinic text. In other words, I mentioned very briefly transcendence and immanence. You could say the Holy One, blessed be He. That's describing God in very regal terms, right? August terms. God seems to be more in heaven. So God is up there in heaven. That's the Holy One, blessed be He. Shekhinah is God appearing on earth or interacting with Israel, interacting with the human being. So I think it's correct to say Shekhinah is God moving toward the world and toward relating with human beings. And then in Kabbalah, the additional meaning of the romance within God.
Last quick question. I know you want to get to something, and we'll do a little over time. And that is, it's kind of a more general question about reading the Zohar. The Zohar is crafted around the Parshiot. You've shown us pieces of the Zohar explaining parts of Genesis, for example. Can you go to a random page, a random story in the Chumash, read the Zohar and kind of, does it stand alone, or do you need to have read other parts of the Zohar where the beginning and to understand the text that you're reading on that page?
Yeah, that's a great
That's
question. Yeah, the Zohar is a running commentary on the Torah, beginning with Genesis, moving through all the Torah. There are actually a few Torah portions in Deuteronomy that have no Zohar. Maybe he got tired near the end, or we just don't have those manuscripts didn't survive. But the Torah is structured according to the Torah. It doesn't really matter where you open the Zohar because you're pretty much lost wherever you open the Zohar. It's like diving into the ocean. We looked at that one passage that's obviously talking about Shekhinah, but you don't find the word Shekhinah. In fact, the Zohar very rarely uses the term Shekhinah, even though she's the main character. She appears in almost every page, but she's not named Shekhinah. She's named the holy apple orchard, or the ocean, the well, the vineyard. Okay, she has many, many different names, and the Zohar likes to be cryptic. So you could begin at the beginning and be lost, or you could open up to Leviticus and be lost. People are welcome to try my Zohar course. We've mentioned that, and you can find all the information on my website, danielcmatt.com. But there, we've been doing that course for almost 6 years, and we're now in volume 3 of the Zohar, of the English, and that we're still in the book of Genesis. We're now on the Joseph story. So the Zohar, you really can dive in anywhere, but you need some guide or assistance, a good life preserver, some help so you don't drown.
Thank you. Okay. We're in overtime, and you can share whatever you'd like to share in overtime.
Great. I want to look at one little text with you as we're preparing for uh, the new year. Next Monday night is Rosh Chodesh Elul, the beginning of the month of Elul, which means 1 month later is Rosh Hashanah. And there's a custom here. I put together a sheet, and I'll read together with you this paragraph so you'll know what's going on. Biblical phrases are called chronograms. I'll define in a moment for the upcoming year. 5,785, which begins on Rosh Hashanah. There's a custom to indicate the Hebrew year with a biblical verse or phrase equal to that year in gematria. Right? Every Hebrew letter is a number. You can find certain groups of letters, a biblical phrase that add up to this total, 785. Usually the 5,000 is just left behind because the thousands don't change very frequently. So we're looking for verses or phrases that add up to 785 in their numerical value. Such words or phrases have been called chronograms. Okay, chrono from time, say a written thing that adds up to a certain time, a certain year. This practice of indicating the year by a biblical phrase is evident on the title page of sacred books and on tombstones. In other words, the year will be indicated by quoting a verse from the Bible, whose gematria adds up to that year. The custom is spread to correspondence and email as a way to enrich the meaning of the current year. These phrases are useful for meditation or reflection as we approach the new year and throughout the year. So here are some phrases that equal Taf Shin Pei He in Gematria 785. Okay, 5,000 is omitted. So this is 30 or 35, roughly 35 phrases, each of which adds up. If you add up the Gematria of each of these letters, it adds up to 785, the same with all of them. I'll just look at a few of them with you, and Ari will make this available to people. You can take it out and print it. As I'm saying, it's useful to meditate